They thought they were speaking to a real agent. The property existed. The documents looked correct. The bank account matched the company name. That is why, when they sent $110,000, they did not hesitate. By the time they realized what had happened, the person they had trusted had already disappeared. David and Carol Mitchell had spent most of their lives in Ohio before retiring to Florida. They chose a quiet community outside Tampa where the pace was slower and the days felt predictable. For years, they rented a small home, taking their time before deciding where they wanted to settle permanently. They were not in a rush. They had worked hard to build their savings, and they treated every financial decision with care. David had worked in manufacturing, managing operations and maintenance, where attention to detail was part of his daily routine. Carol had spent decades in administrative roles, handling paperwork, schedules, and financial records. They were used to reviewing information, asking questions, and making decisions based on facts rather than emotion. That mindset had served them well throughout their lives. Their goal was simple. They wanted to buy a modest home they could afford comfortably, somewhere close to the water but not directly on it, where maintenance would be manageable and the environment would stay consistent. They had seen how quickly Florida could change, with new developments and rising costs, and they wanted stability more than anything else. For several months, they searched carefully. They browsed listings online, attended open houses, and spoke with different agents. Some properties were too expensive, others required repairs they did not want to deal with. A few seemed promising, but by the time they followed up, they were already under contract. Over time, they began to understand how competitive the market could be. That idea stayed with them. If they found something that felt right, they would need to act quickly. One afternoon, while reviewing listings, Carol came across a property that immediately stood out. It was a single-story home in a quiet neighborhood with a clean interior, updated kitchen, and a small backyard. The photos were clear and consistent, showing a house that did not appear staged or exaggerated. It looked lived in, maintained, and realistic. The price was slightly lower than similar homes in the area, not dramatically lower, but enough to feel like an opportunity. It did not raise concern. It created interest. The listing included contact information for an agent named Stephen Clark. Carol sent a message. The response came within an hour. Stephen introduced himself in a calm and professional tone. He confirmed that the property was still available and explained that the owner was relocating for work, which is why the house was priced to move quickly. He offered to schedule a virtual walkthrough the next day, explaining that it would allow them to see the property in detail without waiting for an in-person visit. Everything about the interaction felt normal. The timing felt efficient, not rushed. They agreed to the call. The next day, Stephen walked them through the house on video. He moved through each room at a steady pace, answering their questions without hesitation. When David asked about the roof, Stephen provided a clear explanation and mentioned recent maintenance. When Carol asked about the neighborhood, he described nearby amenities in a way that matched what they had already researched. Nothing felt off, nothing felt staged. The call felt like a real showing. After it ended, David and Carol spent over an hour discussing what they had seen. They compared the house to others they had considered, reviewed their finances, and talked through the pros and cons. Everything made sense. The only factor that stood out was timing. Stephen mentioned there were other interested buyers and that offers would likely be reviewed within a few days. That matched what they already knew about the market. By the next afternoon, they decided to move forward. Stephen sent over the purchase agreement. The document was detailed, structured, and written in clear professional language. The formatting was clean, the terms were standard, and the numbers matched what had been discussed. David reviewed each section carefully. Carol focused on the financial details and timelines. They compared their understanding afterward. There were no inconsistencies. Later that day, Stephen followed up. His tone remained calm and consistent. He explained that the next step was to secure the property with a deposit. He described it as a standard part of the process in a competitive market. He did not place pressure. He presented it as a way to protect their position. That approach made it feel reasonable. Over the weekend, they prepared. They reviewed their accounts, confirmed the amount they were comfortable sending, and went through the documents again. David searched for the brokerage Stephen mentioned. It existed. The website looked professional, with active listings and a real office address. He called the number listed on the site. No one answered. He assumed it was because it was the weekend. There was no reason to doubt anything. Monday morning, the wiring instructions arrived. The email was formatted professionally and included all the expected details. The company name matched the brokerage, the bank was recognizable, the account information aligned with what they had seen. They reviewed the instructions together, step by step. Everything checked out. Later that morning, they went to their bank and authorized a wire transfer of $110,000. The process was smooth. The transaction was completed without issue. When they returned home, they felt a sense of progress. Shortly after, an email arrived confirming that the funds had been received and that the next steps would follow. Everything felt complete. Tuesday passed without updates. They were not concerned. Delays were common. Wednesday passed, and Carol sent a follow-up email. There was no response. She called. The call went to voicemail. She tried again later. The result was the same. By Friday morning, it could not be ignored. David decided to contact the brokerage directly. This time, someone answered. He asked for Stephen Clark. There was a pause before the response came. There was no agent by that name. David explained everything, the calls, the documents, the deposit. The person on the other end listened, then repeated the same answer. The email they had been using was not connected to their company. No one by that name worked there. In that moment, everything began to fall apart. They contacted their bank immediately, but the transfer had already been processed. The funds had been moved through multiple accounts. Recovery was not possible. Investigators later explained how the scam worked. The listing had been copied from a property that had already been sold. The photos were real, but reused. The website they had seen was a replica of a legitimate brokerage, designed to look identical. The video walkthrough had been pre-recorded and used alongside a live call to create the illusion of interaction. Every step had been planned. David and Carol had not been careless. They had verified information, reviewed documents, and asked questions. Each decision they made was based on what appeared to be legitimate evidence. That is what made it effective. The money was never recovered. Their plans changed. The home they believed they were securing never existed for them. They adjusted their expectations and focused on rebuilding what they could. But the financial loss was not the only impact. The deeper loss was trust. Because after that experience, every decision felt heavier. Every opportunity required more verification. Every interaction carried doubt. They no longer questioned just the situation. They questioned their own judgment. And that is what makes this kind of scam so dangerous. It does not rely on carelessness. It relies on belief.